And welcome to the Watchman. Well, you might have missed it, but back in September, an ISIS spokesman released an audio tape. In it, he called for Western Muslims to rise up and kill Western civilians and soldiers. Now, he targeted in specific Australia, the United States, Europe, and Canada. And folks, guess what? Radicalized Western jihadists are responding. It all started back in September in rural Moore, Oklahoma, just outside of Oklahoma City, when a radicalized ISIS sympathizer, a Muslim convert, walked into the meat processing plant where he worked, saw a co-worker, randomly a grandmother, mind you, and attacked her. He beheaded her and attacked another co-worker, severely injuring her as well. Now, when you look at this jihadist Facebook page, you see images of Osama bin Laden, pro-ISIS rhetoric, anti-American rhetoric, images of the Twin Towers burning. Yet law enforcement authorities said this had nothing to do with terror and it was just a case of workplace violence. Isn't that nice? Well, you could chalk it up as an isolated incident, but shortly after that ISIS audio tape, we saw another serious plot. This time it was in Australia. 12 ISIS sympathizers were arrested, thankfully, before they had a chance to carry out what was really a sadistic plot. They planned to kidnap an Australian civilian off the streets of Sydney, someone, an average guy or girl who's just walking to the bus in the morning to catch a ride to their 9 to 5. These ISIS sympathizers planned to kidnap someone randomly off the streets and behead them for the cameras. Now, right around that same time, also in Australia, again, a radicalized Muslim attacked 2 Australian counterterrorism police, stabbing them repeatedly. Now, this is a pattern that continues. We see now in Canada, where we had, number one, a radicalized jihadist, again an ISIS sympathizer, who really wanted to travel overseas, according to authorities, and fight with ISIS there. He was foiled in those plans. So what he did was he took a car and he mowed down 2 Canadian soldiers, killing one of them just a few days after that attack. And there's so many of these coming, folks, in such rapid succession, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around them and keep track. Mind you, all of this has happened in a 4-week span, not coincidentally, right after that ISIS audio tape was released. Jihadists are responding. Again, we had a lone wolf, call them lone wolves, call them homegrown jihadists, attacked and killed, shot a Canadian soldier, then stormed the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa, opened fire before he himself thankfully was killed. Now, Canada's Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, was in the building that day, was in the Parliament building in Ottawa. He escaped. But this is a serious, serious thing. And in the same week that we had these 2 deadly attacks in Canada, look, folks, 2 Canadian soldiers murdered, butchered on Canadian soil. That same week in New York City, we saw a hatchet-wielding jihadist maniac attack 4 NYPD police officers on a busy street corner in Queens. Now, one of the officers was critically injured, hit in the head with a hatchet. Another one was injured as well before this jihadist was shot and killed. We know he's a jihadist, again, because a lot of times, folks, these terrorists leave a paper trail on social media. When you look at their Facebook pages, when you look at their Twitter accounts, they're littered with pro-ISIS, pro-Al-Qaeda, anti-American propaganda and rhetoric that shows their aims and shows their motivations. Look, in the case of the Oklahoma beheader, this did not happen in a vacuum. Is it really a coincidence, folks, that on the heels of several ISIS beheadings of Western hostages, that an ISIS sympathizer goes into his place of work and beheads a non-Muslim, an infidel in their view? This is not coincidental, and I have to tell you, folks, I'm concerned. Again, this is all over a 4-week span. Several of these lone wolf, homegrown attacks by ISIS sympathizers, you can really turn yourself into a one-man or one-woman jihad. It's really not that difficult. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to walk into a shopping mall, yell Allahu Akbar, and open fire. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we have entered a dangerous new phase in that regard. ISIS is a different animal. Look, Al-Qaeda for years has called for these kinds of self-starter, low-tech attacks. And we've seen the Fort Hood attack, another case of workplace violence, where Nidal Hassan, an Al-Qaeda sympathizer, radicalized jihadist, killed 13 brave U.S. soldiers. We saw, obviously, the Boston bombings. 2 committed young jihadists killed 4 people, wounded 254 more, shut down a major American city for the better part of a week. We saw the attempted Times Square bombing. We saw the attempted underwear bomber on Christmas Day 2009. What I fear is that now that ISIS has emerged in such a powerful way, ladies and gentlemen, and they're resonating with young Muslims across the West. Look, we've had up to 3,000 Western passport holders leave their comfortable lives in Britain, Denmark, the United States, France, etc., and travel to Iraq and Syria and join ISIS. Number one, I'm afraid that some of them may come home and bring the jihad here. But number two, and an even immediate threat, are people here who sympathize with ISIS who have never traveled to Syria and Iraq. They may never have left the United States. Maybe they were radicalized online. We know that ISIS is so media savvy. It's just a new level in what they're doing on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. So what I'm concerned about is that ISIS sympathizers are going to attempt to turn the United States into a battlefield. And what I mean is really an insurgency on American soil, folks, a guerrilla war type situation. Look, in the span of 4 weeks alone, as I laid out for you, we had several of these attacks and attempted attacks. I've called these in the past chip away attacks in my first book, The Terrorist Next Door, because they can chip away at a country's economy, its psyche, its security, its stability. And what we're seeing is the proliferation of these chip away attacks now on Western soil. It is a serious concern because a lot of times you never see it coming. It's something to keep an eye on. Look for these chip away lone wolf attacks, I fear, to increase until we recognize the enemy, we identify the enemy, and the ideology that drives the enemy. Well, shifting gears a bit, the recent Hamas-Israel war sparked a wave of anti-Semitism across the West. But CBN News recently spoke to one British Muslim who became a Zionist, pro-Israel, just by checking the facts. My CBN News colleague John Wagi has that story.
Qasim Hafiz is a Pakistani Muslim born, raised, and living in the UK.
As I was brought up around a lot of anti-Israel feeling, and especially for my dad, very blatant and direct Israel hatred and anti-Semitism.
As a university student, Hafiz campaigned against the Jewish state. He attended marches, handed out leaflets, and called for boycotts of Israel. He said he was even willing to die to free Palestine and rid the world of Israel.
My narrative was there was a Palestinian state, the Jews came from Europe, stole the land, and voila, Israel.
Then he found Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel, and decided to read it so he could refute what he thought was Zionist propaganda.
And I thought I'll buy it and be able to disprove it because Israel has no case. I know the history, I'm an expert in it all. So I start reading this book. And the most basic of facts about Israel and the Jewish people, I had no clue about. I mean, one of the most basic ones I came across was a Palestinian state has never existed.
And that was just the beginning. 2 years later, he visited Israel.
When you go to passport control and they say, what is the purpose of your visit? Just say you're here for a holiday. Don't say, well, I used to be anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Now I'm not quite sure, so I thought I'd come and see what it's like.
After 8 hours in airport security, Hafiz was allowed into Israel.
It highlighted Israel's unique security situation. Look, it's not politically correct to say this, it's not nice to say this, but people from my background, people with my kind of name, have an awful tendency of blowing stuff up in Israel. And also, I was treated with a lot of respect. You want to see racism? Go to Saudi Arabia as a non-Arab.
When Hafiz arrived in Jerusalem, he saw different ethnic and religious groups mixing in the city.
Be it Muslims, be it people from African heritage, be it Europeans, be it people from the Middle East. It's just such a crazy mix of people. And then you see the signs in English and Hebrew and Arabic, and it straight away blows away that idea of apartheid and racism.
Hafiz says Muslims refuse to accept Israel's existence in the middle of the Arab world. Then there are conspiracy theories and the pack mentality.
I mean, it's that kind of ingrained that there's this global conspiracy by the Jews to destroy Islam and take over the world, and it's really sad, but this whole anti-Israel cause has become very popular. It's seen as the cool cause almost, and nobody wants to kind of break off from the kind of pack and be seen as an outsider. I mean, for me, it was very difficult to go, okay, look, I was wrong. And I think that's a huge part of it.
To have a revelation about the Jews and Israel, Hafiz says the Muslims must embrace reality.
To actually step back and just look at the world, just think what you actually stand for. Is this irrational hatred over a group of myths that you've been told really worth it? And you've got to ask, do you really want peace? One of the most frustrating things for me is within the Muslim community, we have a double standard. We judge Israel and America by one standard, which we refuse to apply to ourselves.
Hafiz says his aha moment came at the Western Wall in Jerusalem.
I feel I'm very blessed to be where I am because it has changed my life for the better. You know, it's beautiful to wake up without this hatred, without this anger. Is it God? I don't know. Maybe.
John Waggy, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, it's a tiny country with a big influence on America's Middle East policy. Find out more after the break. And welcome back. Well, as part of its coalition to fight ISIS, the Obama administration has enlisted the help of some Arab nations. One of those nations is a very shady ally, to say the least. Qatar is Hamas's main supporter and financier and has been accused of funding terror groups in Syria. The Qataris deny it, but the evidence says otherwise. Take a look. $11 billion in advanced American weaponry, Apache helicopters, Patriot missile batteries, anti-tank missiles, all for a tiny Muslim nation in the Persian Gulf that you can barely find on a map. Qatar may not be a household name for most Americans, but as this summer's huge arms deal shows, the Qataris are among the Obama administration's closest allies in the Middle East. Yet Qatar has come under heavy criticism from neighboring countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. They and Egypt have cut relations with the tiny kingdom because it supports the Muslim Brotherhood. One Israeli official even called Qatar the world's largest funder of terror, thanks to its close alliance with Hamas.
Qatar supports Hamas in three ways. One is financially. It's given Hamas hundreds of millions of dollars. Two is politically. The ruler of Qatar was the first Arab state to visit Hamas-ruled Gaza in 2012. And the third way it supports Hamas, we can say physically, Qatar is host and home to Hamas's political leadership.
Speaking to the UN General Assembly, Qatar's emir urged world governments to shun Israeli officials, accusing Israel of war crimes during its recent operation against Hamas in Gaza.
Qatar has pledged over the last decade or so over $500 million to Hamas governments, Hamas infrastructure projects, and Hamas loyalists in the Gaza Strip.
David Weinberg is a Mideast analyst for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He told CBN News that Qatar's cozy relationship with Hamas is starting to get attention.
We've seen some public statements recently from Mike Rogers, the Intel Committee chairman in the House, as well as from the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, Ed Royce, both raising concerns about Qatar's record in this regard.
In July, Illinois Congressman Peter Roskam sent a letter to the Obama administration demanding an end to the close alliance with Qatar. Roscom wrote, "It's an indisputable fact that Qatar has become the chief sponsor of Hamas, an internationally recognized terrorist organization committed to the destruction of Israel. The Obama administration must explain its working partnership with a country that so brazenly funds terrorism right before our eyes." During Israel's recent war with Hamas, Secretary of State John Kerry drew heavy criticism for promoting Qatar as an honest broker that could help negotiate a ceasefire, despite its open support for Hamas.
Here was Qatar's chance to shine on the international stage while the world was watching these negotiations. And Qatar showed itself as Hamas's supporter rather than an effective mediator.
It's not the first time Qatar served as mediator for the administration. Most recently, it secured the controversial release of U.S. soldier Bo Bergdahl from the Taliban. The Taliban even has an office in the Qatari capital of Doha. So does Al Jazeera, the network which has been accused of being anti-American and a mouthpiece for radical Islamists, is based in Qatar.
The relationship is extraordinarily close. For many years, the Qatari government was subsidizing Al Jazeera.
The most explosive charge is that Qatar helped fund jihadists in Syria, including ISIS and the al-Qaeda-linked al-Nusra Front, two groups targeted by U.S. airstrikes. The Qatari government strongly denies it, but a top Treasury Department official said last March that wealthy private donors who live in Qatar have backed the jihadists. The official described Qatar as a permissive environment for terrorist fundraising. But with the Qataris apparently on board in the fight against ISIS and Qatar hosting a major U.S. airbase, don't expect a change in relations anytime soon. Coming up, where does ISIS get its money? We follow the money trail with terror expert Rachel Ehrenfeld after the break. Don't move. And welcome back. Well, they've been called the richest terrorist group in the world. So how does ISIS get its money? We're joined now to discuss it by terror expert Rachel Ehrenfeld. She's the founder and CEO of the American Center for Democracy and author of a great book called Funding Evil: How Terrorism is Financed and How to Stop It. Rachel, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, look, we hear you are the best, Rachel, in my view. Funding Evil is a seminal work when it comes to terror financing, following the money trail. No one is better than you. So we're hearing that ISIS makes, some people say 2 million, some people say 3 million a day, just on this illicit oil trade. What are your thoughts on that? Is this oil trade a main source of revenue for ISIS?
No. The oil trade, and I've written about it too, you can read it on ACD's website, American Center for Democracy's website. There is no way that, considering what is happening with the oil, there is not the pipeline is not, there is nothing going there. The refineries are not working, so they have some mom and pops refineries. There is no way that they are selling $1 million worth of oil. Wow. Any way you look at it, because we know that they are selling it, whatever oil they have, they are selling it for about half price. So considering the price of oil, if they sell it for half price, so it's already less than $1 million. And this is what the Treasury Department announced last week. They are not making $1 million of this.
Rachel, that's very interesting. You're actually the first person I've heard to say that, because people are really, no pun intended, blowing up this ISIS oil trade. That's very interesting. So
I suggest you go and you look at the article, because it would be probably interesting to your readers as well.
Yes, absolutely. American Center for Democracy. Now, Rachel, is ISIS, considering, okay, maybe they're not making that much in oil on a daily basis, are they still the world's richest jihadist organization?
No, well, no. Iran is the richest jihadist terrorist organization. Mm-hmm. Iran and its affiliates and the Hezbollah, because Iran is a terrorist organization.
It's a terrorist state, absolutely.
Entity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they are the richest, and ISIS is not the richest. And the stories about we are being told that the Saudis and the Gulf and others are not funding it, not true. And the problem is not so much that the ISIS is now, well, they go to places, they conquer a place, they go over and they take every money that they seize. Okay, so they are looters, they are barbaric, it's a barbaric organization, barbarians. But they have been, the biggest problem is, where did the funding come from in order to create such a base from which you can actually have pick up such a crazy group of people? And this base has been funded for a long time and expanded, and the money came from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states.
Yeah. Our good friends, our allies, right?
Yeah.
Our
Absolutely.
so-called allies.
And
Rachel,
we are allowing them to build here mosques and to send the imams to preach and to deliver the books from which they are inciting for jihad in this country.
Yet you cannot build a church or a synagogue in Saudi Arabia. Rachel, we have about 45 seconds left. It goes too fast. But let me ask you, look, we have this ISIS threat. We have these homegrown ISIS sympathizers carrying out attacks. Tell us why Iran is still the #1 threat. Let's not take our ball off this Iranian regime, their nuclear program. How is Iran not only a threat to Israel, but a threat to America?
Iran is preparing to make their nuclear weapons, and this administration is allowing them to do it. Yeah. Is actually begging them to allow them to do it. And this is very dangerous, because when you take jihadists and you give them nuclear weapons, it's not a nice picture. Not there, and not in the Middle East, and nowhere else. In America as well.
And America is the great Satan in that Iranian ideology. Israel is the little Satan. Yep. Rachel Ehrenfeld, enlightening as always. Thank you so much. Everyone check out, you see the website on your screen, the American Center for Democracy, also funding evil. It is a seminal work in the finding the money trail, uncovering the money trail of jihad. Rachel Ehrenfeld, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And welcome back. You know, ISIS may be grabbing the headlines, and deservedly so, but folks, do not forget about Iran, which continues to drive towards a nuclear weapon. The uranium is being enriched. The centrifuges are spinning. Keep an eye on that Iranian regime, still the greatest threat we face. Yes, even greater than ISIS. Well, thanks for joining us here on The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace.